Welcome to the Future of Tourism podcast. I'm David Peacock.
Stop owning your own content.
Young leaders are stepping up.
Bring everyone to the table
and imagine their world anew.
Welcome back to the Future of Tourism, where we talk with the thinkers and doers shaping the next era of our industry. If you zoom out, way out, and you look at the last 2.5 decades, tourism has had every reason to falter. The numbers tell a simple but profound story. This is an industry that contracts quickly in a crisis, but rebounds even faster. According to the World Bank, even global shocks like SARS and the 2008 recession led to only modest short-term drops in international arrivals. In terms of COVID, the UNWTO Tourism Barometer, according to its latest terms, speaks of international tourism virtually recovered as pre-pandemic levels by 2024. This would suggest that tourism is a system that's been remarkably resilient to external shocks. Ryan George has been at the helm of SimpleView, now a Granicus company, for more than 2 decades. He's guided hundreds of destinations through disruption. Under his leadership, SimpleView evolved from a data-forward CRM company into one of the most influential destination tech stacks there is. Good morning, Ryan George. How are you? Where are you? What's it like?
I am doing well. I am here at the Tucson headquarters, where it is blazing hot. Having been born and raised here, and even in talking with friends today, I don't remember a weekend hotter than the one we had this past weekend. But past that, beautiful indoors, and getting ready to embark on some more travel here over the next couple weeks.
Well, I don't know. I said to someone the other day, it's hot like Arizona up here, and they just laughed at me. But it's been unseasonably hot for about 4 weeks, and even if it's humid, it's still scorching now.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, it's really great to see you. I want to kick this off. We had this conversation started for me probably back in January. We did the Executive Insight Symposium in San Francisco as part of Summit. And we were talking about sort of the shocks, the past shocks and the future shocks that this industry endures. Just as you come off the heels of one like COVID, boom, you think you got it sorted. You're never going to be caught out again. You're going to be stay well engaged. And then along comes another series of world shocks in terms of wars and crises and trade. And you said, well, hang on, 20 years of SimpleView, I sort of feel like this is an incredibly resilient industry. And you started to expound on that. So I want to talk a bit about that today. But to do that, I'm going to ask you to do something weird. I want you to go back and I want you to look at the beginning of SimpleView, because the period you're talking about, you're really just starting out. And you build a company that solves a lot of problems, helps this industry become more resilient in some sense, but also reacts to a series of shocks. So let's go right back to the beginning of that. When did you found it, and what did you run into?
Yeah, so Rich, Bill, Scott, and I came together in February of 2001. Little could we have imagined that 7 months later, planes would hit buildings, and without question, travel, tourism, and the world stopped. And that was, as you say, kind of our first brush with the kinds of things that can happen in travel, and how deeply they can be affected. As I say, we were maybe a 6, 7, 8 person company. There's not a world where you cut 25% of your staff when you're 8 people necessarily. 08, 09 was probably more informative to the way I would begin to think about resilience in travel and tourism. I remember talking to a lot of colleagues and a lot of friends at a lot of DMOs who did face 25% plus layoffs. I think the concept of Friday furloughs maybe was invented around that time to try and retain staff and have many people share a little bit of the pain, as many did. We eventually saw the recovery, and we saw, demand on top of demand. And so by the time we got to COVID, It was informed by really those two bigger shocks and factors. Immediately, I started researching what had happened in those past two crises. And again, clearly 9/11 was a bigger shock than the extended 08-09 crisis that kind of affected us for a longer period of time, but not as dramatically. And, you mentioned the UNWTO in your introduction, but I found a study at the time really referring back to 9/11 and the recovery that happened. They were referencing the fact that by 2004, travel had recovered to pre 9/11 levels. And I think we're seeing that same almost identical trend now, with nearly as precipitous a drop with COVID, and then nearly, if not a faster recovery with COVID. So it almost seems like, the harder we fall, the faster we climb as an industry, and the effects aren't as lasting.
You're given the context of an industry that's been through crisis, but talk to me about where you saw the resiliency there. And I mean, you're a supply company. In your early days, you're highly focused on customer service. You're building a product around customer service. What do you mean by resiliency in those situations?
I think tourism is an adaptive business model in and of itself. Whether you're hoteliers or you're running an airline, you're constantly in a state of flux and you're constantly making adjustments. And so this industry tends to adjust more quickly. And I think the third piece of it, and you touched on it, is the idea of hospitality and service as a mantra. When times get tough, people in tourism, people in hospitality, they're the first to look to how they can help, because that's what they've done all their lives. That's what they do for a living. And so there's a real roll up your sleeves kind of an effort. And again, we saw it during COVID, whether it was how to get the word out to restaurants as to how to really transform their business into something that was more takeout based, where maybe they had done very little before. We'll all always remember the plexiglass dividers and half the tables removed from restaurants and things. DMOs were at the front of kind of informing people, but then that very resilient, very how I can help nature, very adaptable industry that is tourism, made it all happen and made it all sing. And so it's very familial in that way. We're always kind of all in it together, pushing forward, adapting, changing, etc.
So you talked about great examples like Toronto, a shift during COVID, or an engagement shift. Even I think of in this last year and a half, Greenville and the floods in Asheville. Tremendous efforts by both those DMOs to not even miss a beat, but turn and immediately be in a position helping and playing that role. And I think that's a role. I think it has evolved over the last 20 years, but that speaks to a level of respect and engagement. And I think I'm always, concerned as a development person about the level of engagement and respect that DMO gets. But it is a remarkable growth, isn't it? I mean, they have come in huge distance to, kicking into gear when there's a crisis versus sitting around and waiting to be asked 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, without question. And, I'm a little embarrassed to say now that in the early days, I would say sometimes as a technology company, we would light a match and people thought we invented fire, because DMOs and CVBs were technology laggards, call it way back then. I'm extremely proud now to say that they're leaders in technology adoption, how to deploy technology to solve really critical problems. And I'd like to believe that we played a big part in that.
Well, let's drill into that, because first blush, if you're standing in tourism and you're looking at I don't know, you're looking at Google, you're just going, oh, how are we ever going to rate? How do they rate? Go back 2000, early 2005 to now. As technology stands, you said they're leaders, but unpack that, because I don't think a lot of people believe that, but I get it when you talk about it. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, again, I was, I have been incredibly lucky to have graduated from college at a time when Mosaic was invented as one of the first web browsers. And really, we've seen the internet and internet technology grow ever since then. So, to find yourself half accidentally in an industry that just grows every year for 25 years, again, better lucky than good in that. But, we're all early adopters on new technology curves, and oftentimes it comes down to budget.
Mhm.
And those with the most money at the beginning of a technology curve tend to get very far ahead very fast. So, in the early days, it was as simple as how do we get our listings, which we've traditionally only ever published in a magazine style visitor's guide, from the database that is in our closet onto this thing called a web page, and how do we make sure it's up to date and things like that. And as you say, then, and in some ways as much as it is now, then Google starts aggregating all of this data, and they're creating listings, and TripAdvisor is soliciting reviews on businesses that businesses don't know how to respond to, and those kinds of things. But in any of those technology curves, I think it's safe to say that those that are most adaptable learn to catch up, keep up, and then in many cases outmaneuver even those with more money. And so it really goes back to that idea that DMOs and CVBs were almost built to catch that technology wave, more so than their counterparts probably in city government, more so than their counterparts in other more laggard-like industries. And now I think DMOs are on maybe not equal footing to a Google, any one of them, but in the aggregate and the amount of brain power and I'll say thought leadership that's coming out of our space, we see those companies leaning in and asking questions and trying to figure out how to get more involved. I mean, and Google, they got involved in the airline game probably 7-8 years ago now, and it's a big part of what they do.
So in the case of the next round of challenges, and we haven't even begun to talk about generative AI, and it's as disruption is to me as big as the internet, and something like COVID thrown in just to make it even more challenging. In that case, if you look at SimpleVue's legacy value, so CRMs and systems, this is not my field, but I look across industries and everybody has them in some shape or form. Very few industries did they ever stratify and come down to sort of simple centralized programs or systems. Tourism has a great luxury there, and yet had another luxury too. Because one of its other jobs was communicating out, a lot of the innovation in thinking about digital distribution took place in the visual world over the last 20 years. So you're saying that they're well positioned technically to take advantage of the AI stream. So let's talk about the AI opportunity for a second here, because you said this earlier. Google is aggregating, and it's aggregating and creating its own AI-like responses. But you said something the other day to me, but good content still wins, and AI will get better at attributing source to good sources. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, and I tread lightly because I think if you throw a rock, you will find someone who's willing to give their opinion about AI. But I think that I'm qualified, having spent 25 years with DMOs and arguably built the leading tech stack in the space, to say why I think DMOs are well positioned. So to your question, we've seen a precipitous drop in web traffic to our websites. I mean, in as much as we're super happy to say that internationally speaking, travel and tourism, travel's back. There are pockets, obviously, that are suffering for various reasons, geopolitical or political. But by and large, we're back to where we were before. The absolute opposite is true when you look at web traffic. And the reason is generative AI. I mean, I myself use ChatGPT 10x what I use, a web search for today. Now, the good news is we are learning more about how these models are learning. And the reality is that they are learning from the internet writ large. So, we're starting to see, and I think that the measurement models are going to have to change. And in some way, DMOs are going to have to reprove their value in a technological landscape. And really to like back that up a little bit, there was a time where, 15 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, I'm dating myself, most CVBs had KPIs related to web traffic. And the tools to measure web traffic were pretty rudimentary. They were, server logs that you installed software against, and it read these server logs and, told you what your web traffic was. Well, as search engines came about, the scraping and the spidering and really the bot-based traffic that websites were reporting as visitors, was starting to get askew and kind of out of hand. And then came tag-based analytics. So things like Google Analytics that, many websites rely on today. And these server logs now, oftentimes we just turn them off because unless we're trying to debug something or we're trying to find out, why something's doing something odd, we don't rely on them. But it caused a big change in how we reported web traffic. So if your bonus was based on web traffic and you went from server log based analytics to tag based analytics, you didn't get your bonus that year unless you explained it really, really well. Because what we were also doing then was eliminating a lot of the spiders, a lot of the bots, a lot of the non-human traffic associated with those metrics. I think the same thing is happening today, in a different way. So just as I said, I use ChatGPT 10 times more often in a day than I use a web search. That doesn't mean that I'm not still accessing the same information from the same place.
Right.
When it's all said and done. It's just that an agent, ChatGPT or Gemini or any one of the LLMs are accessing the data, either pre-accessing it and putting it into its LLM, but oftentimes it's accessing it on the fly. So we've started to look at logs again. And we're starting to find opportunities to create attribution for destination content showing up inside of an LLM. So, which is to say, if we just like all shut off our websites, we're not going to do that, or killed our listings pages, or stopped producing a calendar of events, DMOs would no longer be the source of truth that they once were, because the LLMs are just going to go look elsewhere.
Well, and I don't want to go too far down the AI rabbit hole, as you said, but as AI adoption is increasing, and I'm going to believe it's better than steep logarithmically over the last even 6 to 10 months since we started talking about this, the quality of the answers I'm getting back on the search suggestion AI are dropping to the point where you pretty much can't look at anything with a number in it to assume the number is correct. And I'm assuming it's because it's learning off the mass use of questioning, but it's starting to kludge together answers from two different sources to make one thing. And you go, no, those are two things. So this whole idea of verification, we talked about it before, but I think that's, it's encouraging to hear you say that, because I think of a world where simply volume becomes fact. And that's very scary. So you did talk specifically about the idea then that the DMO's in a good position because of the structure of the data and the veracity of it.
Yeah, exactly. And, we work really hard to make sure that information on a website is no more than 3 clicks away for a user. But the reality is these LLMs can get 15 clicks deep, extremely quickly. And so it's making that unsurfaced content even more valuable and more important. And that's all on the web front. And in the real time, and there are other things that are difficult today and always have been to aggregate or display and therefore access or learn about. And it is things like local events.
Mhm.
You can aggregate a list of hotels, restaurants, attractions, sit on your hands for 6 months, and it's probably still 95% accurate. Sit on your hands for 2 years, it's probably still 80% accurate. Um, an events calendar is inaccurate like every day, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's something that it still takes humans to aggregate so that these LLMs can find that data. But put that aside. There's another area where I think we're just at the very beginning of helping DMOs to recognize the power that they have, and it is in our first party data. So, you know, for better or worse, many DMOs have been collecting um, website logs and histories of content. They've been collecting email addresses of people who may have requested a visitor's guide. And, in many cases, they track their meeting sales or events, large events, meetings and festivals and things like that. They track that success back for decades. These very bespoke data sets become extremely valuable in a world of AI based marketing, because even if you activate all the AI based marketing tools in the world, they're only as good as the relevant data that you're able to feed them. And if you're able to feed them 2 decades of, here are the meetings that we bid and we won, here are the meetings that we bid and we lost, here are the months that our destination is most attractive, least attractive, here are the market segments that our destination is the most attractive, least attractive. Here are the factors that may have impacted one year versus another, whether it's, weather related, crime related, et cetera. You start to be able to provide this, genius on your shoulder, the information that it needs to be able to serve you well. While I think 10 years from now, there'll be no such thing as a CRM the way that we know it today, because I also happen to believe that primary key structured databases are likely to go away in favor of data lakes and UI that really is an AI UI. I don't even know what that'll look like in 10 years, but you won't be typing things into forms anymore. You won't be asking for a report and having it spit back out to you in columns with subtotals. It'll be a far more fluid, more human experience. But yeah, just backing that up, what we have now provides the building blocks necessary to be at the forefront of this AI revolution that, I envy the people that are starting today that probably won't get to try this for 25 years, because I think what we're going to see in the next 5 or 10 is going to be all that much more, multiplicative in terms of how fast it grows. But again, very, very smart people working at DMOs today, and the companies that support and consult to those DMOs are ready for this challenge. And, again, like, give a hospitality professional the opportunity to adapt, and they're going to outpace most anyone else in another industry. And I'm super confident in that.
Okay, so if I
I
said
didn't know this was supposed to be a 1 hour speech, but
it's okay, it's okay.
So,
We it might take 2 hours. We come
Yeah.
back to it again. No, thanks for that. So the legacy piece. So if I said to you the legacy piece of Simple You, then really, how could you know 20 years ago, looking forward, you didn't know the industry would be continually a growth industry. You're right. You got into the right industry at the right time, technology growth, you managed that. But if I said to you the legacy piece, then is you've helped prepare them and future proof them. And in my world, that's helped them engage better with their communities, because the inability to connect on a dated level today is almost inexcusable. And we're actually seeing whole generation shifts of people are marginalized by their inability to check. You know, you see it as if you have got aging parents, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. So if that's the legacy piece, are you happy with it?
Oh, super happy. And, you know, from a humble perspective, a lot of companies like Tourism Economics, DI aligning us all, had to do with that. But again, I can say with confidence that SimpleView built the market leading product related to the aggregation and reporting of data in our space, period. The other thing, and that will, again, pay dividends, particularly when aggregated down the road. But more than that, I'm proud of, the people that we helped to educate. I think the careers that we helped to build. I think the people who were at, the mid levels of a DMO who, learned and adapted and became technology and as you say, data literate are the people running DMOs today. I think the people, there are people who started at DMOs that have moved on from the DMO space. They're absolutely crushing it at companies that are now helping DMOs to do more. Beyond just our products and our tools, we were very, conscientious and conscious of our role in thought leadership. So, employing people like you, people like Shimo, people on our data team, running things like our summit, improving the quantity, the quality, and the velocity of the information that we're sharing. A lot of those things weren't things that flowed directly to the bottom line. They weren't things that were, necessarily good for the P&L short term, but long term in being part of, I'll say, building a more resilient industry, building partners who are ready to take up the mantle and fight when those challenges occur or seize on opportunities. Really, we benefited from in the long run, obviously, and have done really well in that. So, again, yeah, super proud, right? Technology side, no question. But, the people side, and I think how we, not only as a company, but even as an industry, are so willing to share best practices and grow from one another and, take up initiatives that are good for the whole. It's just a great, great combination. So internet, tourism,
Well, listen, I remind you, I first encountered SimpleView, and I think it was somewhere in Washington State at a trade show, and I was looking for CRM or a reservation system, and that was the first of it. And I would tell you back then, this is 2009, 2010, and I knew that we needed digital tools to engage our stakeholders because we needed to engage our stakeholders, and the future tools were digital. And it was that simple. And to have tools and things like Digital Influence Report came out of that you could sit across from someone across the table from you and said, hey, we're in this journey too, and we're really confused about it. It became a really central role for the regional office or the DMO to say, hey, we're not 9 steps ahead of you, but we're enough ahead of you that we can help you through this. And so that's why it was so important also to have those tools. You could engage, but you had to bring something new to the table. And that was dealing with disruption and then dealing with the optimization of messaging and social, and now dealing with the opportunity of AI. So, it's been a big part of the engagement side of my equation for a long time. So I got to thank you for that. I don't know if I ever said that.
Yeah, no, well, I recall that meeting actually pretty well, and it was in Seattle when DI held their event out there. And again, great that they help power this ecosystem. But reminding me of an event reminded me of something else. And I think it was 3 years ago at our summit. I had everyone in the audience raise their hands, who in the audience would consider themselves their CMS or web admin. again, years ago, we would have called that a webmaster.
Mhm.
But when we started, there was no such job. Imagine that, right?
It sounded like Dungeons and Dragons to most people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yes.
But it was sort of the person at the front desk who, got these, forms that would turn into emails, or they would update content and things. And then that became a job, that became a career. And then I'll kind of never forget, like a Hall of Fame DMO CEO at one of our advisory board meetings said to me, this social media thing, like, what do you think of it? Like, I'm being told I need a social media manager. Like, that sounds like, kind of a lot of phooey, and can our webmaster just do that? Well, that became a whole industry, and it became a job. And then when we think about, the people who became certified and they became, CRM administrators, managing the database itself. And then that gave way to, the data scientists and the data storytellers. And again, we'll, like everyone says, I mean, there are jobs, that'll exist 5 years from now that haven't been invented today. But we were a big part in that. And we're always looking for what is that next job and what's that next tool set that they're going to need. And can we bring them the tool set before the job exists so that someone wants it, needs it, and can use it? But again, it just strikes me the power of events, right? So we don't know each other if we're not at a trade show. I never have that thought that I just reshared, maybe 7 years later if we're not at an event. And again, it goes back to travel. I mean, there will never be an elimination of demand. There will be shifts in travel behavior. There will be, net winners and net losers in travel demand on call it a city or a country basis any given year. But when the pie is always growing, even those whose piece of pie is smaller one year is likely to be at least that size at some point in the future. And if they're constantly adapting and innovating and improving, then it'll be bigger once again, once the whole pie is bigger. So, anyway, another tangent, probably didn't answer your question.
Well, last point on that, on the pie piece. The other thing that I think it allows us to do as destinations is better than ever now, using the AIs and stuff we have, is to look at how we want the pie. How big should it be? When should it be? When should it be segmented? And we'll get better at that. I mean, I think really trying destinations like Helsinki are really pushing against what does that mean? Well, it means something way beyond what we're currently doing, which is exactly that. Can you actually control the pie? Can you maximize it and optimize it? Do you actually put a stop to things? Those questions are all going to be answered in the next 5-10 years. They're going to have to be in so many places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. This has been great. I was going to hit you up with one last question, which is if you had one thing you wanted to throw into the Executive Insight Symposium for 2026 in Atlanta at the Simple View Summit. We usually try and take a tact of the things we kind of don't know. Last year it was smart cities and the intersection with smart tourism. We talked to our friends from Virginia Tech. You spoke in that section along with Phil Zhang. We went down the path of AI governance. Then Adam Burke talked to us about really the essential nature of engagement in future sustainable destinations. Remarkable story from LA. If you could think of any one thing that we're not talking about that maybe we should be talking about by April next year.
So who are the, big Adam Burke type thought leaders in economic development? Who are the Jeanette Roushes of city government? Who are those that can help us to broaden the cooperation and the extension of citizen engagement along with, great visitor experience to grow the pie more than just through travel and tourism, but for everybody. And you're going to have to engage citizens as we answer the question, what's the right kind of tourism? What's the responsible tourism? How do we grow that economy in each of our destinations while also doing it in ways that our citizens benefit from and see as a net positive thing? We've got to have all those people at the table. because no matter how smart we are, no matter how resilient we are, if we're not helping to lead that conversation, then we're not doing our job.